Hello everybody and welcome to the Crypto Curious course presented by Blockchain Institute. My name is Jeremy Kogan and I will be taking you along this blockchain learning journey. A little bit of background info on the course. It's supposed to last about 2 hours and we're really excited to finally be able to share it with you because this has been a long time coming. The first information that we sourced that made this course was probably done so about 2.5 years ago. So we're finally excited to get it into a format where we could share with all of you. Now, what's the goal of the course? It says it right there in the tagline. Log on curious, walk away confident. What does that mean exactly? Well, you're not going to get your crypto PhD. You're not going to become an expert over the 2 hours that this course takes. But what we can do, where we can get you, is to get you a place where you feel competent enough to use these tools confidently. How are we going to do that? By addressing these goals. We're going to learn how to store cryptocurrency securely. We're going to examine the mechanics behind a cryptocurrency transaction. We're going to know where to look when something goes wrong, troubleshooting. We're going to explain how cryptocurrency is different than cash. We're going to understand how blockchain technology may impact you and the world around you. So now that we've gone over the course goals, let's ask a simple question. Why Bitcoin? Why care? Why even learn about these technologies? Well, in order to answer that question, we need to look at the problem that Bitcoin was looking to solve and why the uniqueness of Bitcoin was able to solve it. In order to answer those questions or explore those topics, I'm going to ask yet another question. Do you really have control over your own finances? For the most part, is yes. Most people have control over how they spend their money, where they spend their money, when they spend it, in what form, with whom they interact with. However, this is not completely true. For example, in 2018, when the cryptocurrency market was pretty much booming, banks and credit card processors started censoring transactions, not letting them go through simply because they weren't too keen on cryptocurrency. Additionally, another great example of the lack of financial autonomy that some industries have is the marijuana industry in the United States. Now, on the state level, several states have legislated that marijuana is legal in either medical or recreational purposes. Federally, this is not the case. So what that does, the practical result is that the vendors, the stores that sell marijuana, essentially have no access to any federally regulated banking services, basically making them out of luck, having way too much cash on hand without any good cash option, or option beyond cash. So in order to further explore why Bitcoin and answer that question, we need to look at the creator of Bitcoin, an individual or group of individuals that use the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. Now it's really important to know that nobody knows who Satoshi is. It's one of the great mysteries of the internet. A few things we do know about Satoshi though, he did leave actually several posts on a forum that really outlines his motivation for the creation of Bitcoin. So while we don't know who Satoshi is, we do know or can infer his motivations for creating the Bitcoin network. So why did Satoshi feel compelled to create Bitcoin? And it's very interesting. Now, on a blockchain, in the very first part of a network, on the Bitcoin blockchain, the first message encoded into the network is the same as the headline right here. The exact headline, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It's from the London Times in 2008, right before Bitcoin was created. Now, I don't think it's that big of a stretch to say that Bitcoin was a response to these bailouts. The lack of responsibility that these bailouts kind of absolved the people that got us into a really bad situation. Satoshi was fundamentally against this. So you know what Satoshi did? Satoshi created the Bitcoin network, which is bailout proof. So based off Satoshi's writing and that message encoded into the very first part of the network, again, it's not a stretch to make the inference that Satoshi was heavily motivated by the response to the 2008 financial crisis. So let's go back in time, examine that period, and that will answer the question, what problem was Bitcoin looking to solve? So 2008 was an extremely uncertain time. Started when Lehman Brothers, an investment bank, collapsed. Normally, just one investment banking institution of that size collapsing has a big effect on the economy, but Lehman Brothers was not the only one to go under. Other major investment banks started following suit, kind of dropping like flies, a domino effect. So this led to a very scary time of economic uncertainty. So what caused the financial crisis? Well, a lot of it has to do with the American housing market. Now, the middle class really bought into the American dream of owning property. And normally, in order to secure a loan for property, you need about 20% down payment in order to secure that loan. This is pretty standard. Now, what happened in 2008 that ultimately led to the financial crisis, certain institutions were only requiring a 5% down payment in order to secure the other 15% that would be a traditional down payment. That basically resulted in people having a smaller mortgage on top of an existing one. And this proved unsustainable. People could not afford to stay in their houses. Now, how did this affect the whole global market and not just the American housing market? It has to do with how these investments were packaged. There are vehicles called securities, and what securities are basically a bunch of unlike investments put together in the same investment vehicle. The best analogy to make when talking about securities is it's kind of like sausage. You have a bunch of stuff, a bunch of investments that aren't necessarily like, just going into the same investment vehicle. Now, the bad part about this, the risky part, is if part of that investment, part of that security goes bad, the rest of it is going to go bad. It's going to jump and affect not just the American housing market, but the industries that were also part of that security. If part of the sausage goes bad, the whole sausage goes bad. So the house of cards completely collapsed. It was a complete global financial crisis. And what did the American government decide to do to bring relief to the average consumer? Well, when housing prices started to decline and everything started to collapse, banks ended up treating people like numbers on spreadsheets instead of citizens. The United States government really didn't directly help the citizens. They decided to bail out these banks, something that Satoshi was completely opposed to. And this is why Satoshi came up with the idea of a blockchain. What a blockchain provides, a really key component, is providing digital uniqueness without the use of centralized banks, kind of trying to bypass these institutions. So how is this achieved? Well, blockchains are ledgers that track transactions in a decentralized manner. Decentralized being the key word there. We'll get into the principle of that a little bit later, but basically what it means is you're not relying on the centralized bank to process these transactions. So anybody can make a database that maintains uniqueness. The tough part is sharing that database in order so that not just one computer is enforcing it, but is maintained across the whole network. So transactions don't have to necessarily be money. It could be goods or data. So retail purchases or personal ID numbers. So the technology, while having to deal with money transmission, has applications beyond that. All transactions, this is a really key part, all transactions that are part of the blockchain are timestamped, ordered, and cannot be altered at all time. This avoids repeat entries. Also provides a unique public receipt for all transactions that increases the transparency of the network. You can basically see where all the money is going every transaction. So in order to fully understand why blockchains were created, how they were created, there's another aspect that we have to examine, and that's the history of digital and cryptocurrency. So let's go back to the 1980s for a mini history lesson about the formation of the World Wide Web. Now, I'm sure most people have gotten something called an error 404, page not found. Basically what that means is you sent a request to a server and it could not be fulfilled because the URL was wrong or the basically direction that was taking was blocked off. Error 404 is part of the World Wide Web protocols that were written around this time. Interesting note about these protocols, 404 is the most common, but there's several others that were outlined at the time of the creation of the World Wide Web. And while you might have heard of Error 404, probably haven't heard of Error 402. What that is insufficient payment or payment required. Probably have never gotten this message because, well, there's no native currency built into the internet yet. What this does show us is that the creators of the World Wide Web distinctly had the idea that there could be or should be a digital currency that would work along concert with the rest of the World Wide Web. So this was really possibly the first time that the idea of a digital currency was actually introduced. And this led to a bunch of digital cash experiments, digital currency experiments, over the next about 20 years that ultimately would lead to the creation of Bitcoin. Now, what do all of these projects have in common? There's a few things. The first is that they all contributed technology that would ultimately be put together to make blockchain technology. The other is that several of these projects failed because they were centralized. They had a point of failure that could simply be shut down. And that's what happened with many of them. Additionally, there's another thing that these have in common, that these projects have in common, kind of goes alongside the second point. None of them really made it because they were beat by PayPal. In 1998, PayPal was launched and really took money transmission across the internet from a very small amount or small level to one that has grown into a complete payment juggernaut today. So like I said, the problem with many of these projects is that they were vulnerable to attacks. Every single transaction or action went through a central server. And this client-server model basically is how our whole internet works today. For example, let's say you're sending a message, a Facebook message to a friend. That's you, that computer's your friend right there. Now, what happens is that message does not go directly from you to your friend. No, it has to be processed through a central server to execute the action. Now, while this is very efficient, there are a couple problems with this model. Like I said, central servers are single points of failure that could basically create a vulnerability that could put these projects at risk, or even put out the possibility that these projects could be shut down. So the problem with these projects is that they were vulnerable to attacks because they relied on central servers. And this isn't just endemic to those specific projects. This is actually how our whole internet is built, how everything is conducted. For example, let's say you're sending a Facebook message from you to your friend's computer. You aren't directly sending that message to your friend. No, you have to send it to a server, Facebook server, which then has to facilitate the transaction. In order to do so, in that process, the server isn't just going to facilitate the transaction, it's also going to store data. And this can be dangerous because some of that data can include personal data, like your social security number. This makes these servers targets for attacks. All of that personal data equates to money. And if yours gets compromised, it's not a fun process. This isn't just a theory, it's already happening. There's been countless hacks, from Target to the Equifax hack, a credit reporting institution, that compromised the data of about 140 million Americans. It's a really significant portion of the American populace. So these projects that had central servers that act as repositories are bad news for your personal data. So is there a way to bypass this whole model, known as the client-server model, of which our internet is built upon? Let me introduce decentralized networks. Now, this is a direct response to these central points of failure that could ultimately compromise your data integrity. Decentralized network, notice how It's a completely different layout. It's more of a web. There's no reliance on a central server, which again can be a target for hacks. Instead, it's made up of members of the network that have a copy of all of the transaction data so everybody knows who has what at what given time. So let's define Bitcoin. Bitcoin is both the name of a token and its network. As the first cryptocurrency and implementation of blockchain technology, there was no practical differentiation on inception, but that has since changed. So let's define a couple terms I just introduced in that definition. First is cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency is just a digital currency that's created and secured through a mining process that uses cryptography. Now, a blockchain is a technological backbone that allows cryptocurrencies to function. So, in order to sum it all up, this sentence says it all. Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency token, changes ownership on the Bitcoin network, which utilizes blockchain technology. That's how all of these concepts fit together. Now, there are certain values behind blockchain. For example, Satoshi had certain values that he wanted to carry over to the network, and that is anti-censorship, resilient to infrastructure problems, intentional or accidental, basically saying that if you want to spend your money, no institution can stop you. There's no way to stop you from spending your money or sending it to whoever you want on the Bitcoin network. Transparency is a big aspect of blockchain technology. That digital receipt that I mentioned earlier, that's public to everybody, basically has all the details of what just occurred on the blockchain, all that transaction data. It's easy to simply look up a transaction that happened as far back as the inception of the blockchain, because everything is recorded. And again, every member of the network has a copy of that ledger. Additionally, trustless transactions is a big value behind Bitcoin and blockchain. So transactions can be made in the absence of trust. This is an important economic example or principle that I would like to go over with you so you understand a little bit more. General principle, the less trust there is between parties in a transaction, conducting a transaction, the more facilitators that are going to have to be brought on in order to ensure that trust. Best example of that is, let's say I am selling apples for $1. Now I'm interacting with the Apple, or somebody's interacting with me, the Apple vendor. I'm not sure if they are going to pay me that $1 for the apple. They might just take my apple and run off. Therefore, I need Apple insurance. Let's say the Apple insurance is 15 cents per apple. Now, that 15 cents isn't just going to be ate by the vendor, me. No, I'm going to pass that along to that cost along to the consumer. The less trust there is, the more middlemen that have to be brought in, the more expensive that transaction is going to cost in order to facilitate. That's why blockchain technology focuses on a trustless aspect. So transactions can be made in the absence of trust. By that we mean you don't have to trust somebody don't have to trust the other party in order to confidently execute a transaction. All you have to do is trust the protocol, trust the Bitcoin software. And the best part about that is it's open source. Anybody can go look at the code. Additionally, from Satoshi's writings, we can infer that one of the first intentions was for Bitcoin to be used as a way to transmit money, digital currency that had been first envisioned by the creators of the World Wide Web protocols. The idea of digital currency is tough for some people to grasp, but the interesting part is we're actually kind of using it already. Only 13% of all United States currency is physical, is represented physically by a bill or a coin. The other 87%, just numbers in a ledger controlled by banks. So I definitely argue we're already digitizing currency. Is cryptocurrency that much different? No, not at all. So let's look at the functions of money and see if Bitcoin fulfills any of them, or more than one. So money has to be a store of value. Currency has to hold its value over time, otherwise people aren't going to use that as a medium of exchange. For example, let's say, again, I am selling apples. If I'm selling apples for $1, I get my dollar, and that dollar is worth only 50 cents the next day because of fluctuations in the currency. Well, it's not a very good store of value, and I'm probably not going to accept that form of currency. Additionally, money is a medium of exchange. Has to be used in order to be exchanged for goods and services. This is actually something that also Bitcoin already does. There have been examples of goods and services bought using Bitcoin. We'll get into one of those in a second. And then money also acts as a unit of account, which basically what that means is who has what funds at what given time. And while money, the current monetary system, is pretty good at that, blockchains are even better because they have that receipt, that transparent receipt of every single transaction. So you can go back and look to see who had what at any given period in the blockchain's history. It's all there. So not only is Bitcoin a good unit of account, it's a transparent unit of account. I briefly mentioned the purchase of goods and services using Bitcoin. Let's look at the first recorded purchase of a good using Bitcoin. And you've probably guessed, it's a pizza. So this was a pivotal moment in Bitcoin's history. First recorded good was purchased, paid for using cryptocurrency. A little bit more about this story. On May 22nd, now known and commemorated as Bitcoin Pizza Day, a man agreed to pay 10,000 Bitcoins. Remember, this was way back before Bitcoin had the value that is today. 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 delivered Papa John's pizzas. This was organized via a forum, and he posted, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizza, like maybe 2 large ones, so I have some over for the next day." Yes, that's an actual quote. So a London-based member of the forum, first person was in New York, the guy who wanted pizza was in New York. A London-based member of the forum took him up on the offer, which was a fairly savvy move at the time, considering that the 10,000 Bitcoin at that time amounted to about $41, and he only had to spend, I think, $25 for the 2 pizzas. So that individual already came out ahead. So, interesting thing happened. Bitcoin kind of exploded in value from over here, Bitcoin Pizza Day, to where it is now. That 10,000 Bitcoin today is now worth over $95 million. Now, most people, they give up that amount of Bitcoin that would later result in losing that much money, might be a little bit mad about it, but the individual who exchanged the Bitcoins for pizza says he doesn't really regret anything. He was just really excited to use the technology to prove it worked in a real world setting. So many Bitcoin enthusiasts now get together on May 22nd in order to commemorate Pizza Day annually. As we previously stated, one of the main goals of this course is to understand what goes on under the hood of a Bitcoin transaction or blockchain transaction. So we're going to go over step by step the transaction process, the different stages that Bitcoin goes through when being transferred. It's really important to know that there's no central Bitcoin company and there's no Bitcoin CEO calling the shots. All decisions are made by members of the network. How do you become a member of the network? Easy. Anybody can do it, anybody that has access to the internet and a computer. You just download the software, start running it, and you're part of the network. You just download that blockchain history, you've caught up. So changes in the code, Bitcoin's code, while not controlled by any one decision maker, it can be changed by the average user proposing a change in that code, and other users basically decide to accept or reject those proposals. This is what makes Bitcoin bailout proof. Even if somebody wanted to bail out Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network, it'd be impossible. That's the nature of a decentralized project. Basically, you can't do it. What would you bail out? So the first step in initiating a transaction is data signing. So what this is, basically it's a process that initiates a transaction. In order to initiate that transaction, you need to use your private cryptocurrency data in order to initiate a transaction, in order to say, yes, this is my money, I can prove it, and I'm going to transact, send it wherever. So once this data signing process occurs, transaction is initiated, and it is then broadcast to the network. So the other members, remember, egalitarian members, just anybody running the software on their computer, are alerted of this transaction. They instantly cross-check the transaction with their version of the history of all transactions on the blockchain in order to make sure that, yes, the transaction can go through. Not that somebody is trying to spend the same Bitcoin twice or exceed their balance. So the other nodes on the network are constantly, other members of the network are constantly just cross-checking each other in order to make sure that the rules of the network are being followed. So at this point, transaction has been broadcast. Say everything is good with the transaction. Other nodes are going to say, yeah, this transaction can go through because nobody's trying to do anything wrong. Nobody's trying to mess with the network. At that point, the transaction is validated. It's okay. It is not instantly processed, however. It goes to a place called the mempool. And that's what happens before your transaction is added to a block and is actually executed. So the mempool is basically, the best analogy for it is the waiting room. It's where transactions, validated transactions, so we know they're okay, go into a waiting room before they are processed and executed by putting them into a block. So once it's time to form a block of all these transactions, just a running list of these transactions, eventually it's going to get picked from that mempool, from that waiting room, added into a block, and at that point, that is when the transaction will be executed. Interesting question is, do you have to be online to receive cryptocurrency? I get this question all the time. The answer is no, you don't have to be online. What's going to happen is when you log back on, you might not have the data of that transaction that you're receiving. However, everybody else has the updated copy of that ledger, including the transaction that you want to receive. So what's going to happen is if you're offline, come back online, basically you're going to resync with the blockchain. You're going to catch up in order to basically be up to date. And in doing so, someone else is going to have a record of the transaction you are trying to receive even though you're offline. So basically, you sync with the other nodes or computers on the blockchain in order to catch up and receive your transaction. So it's one thing to know the steps of a blockchain transaction. It's completely different to understand what's happening mechanically, how these nodes, members of the network, come to a consensus of what transactions should be added to the blockchain. Now, it's really easy for a central server to do this because what a central server says is king. It can execute transactions just like that. You do have the security risk. It's a little bit more tricky with a decentralized network. For example, let's say you want to go to a restaurant to eat some lunch. You're going to think about a few restaurants and ultimately make a decision. Now, let's say you're trying to go out to lunch with 10 different people. That decision is going to be a lot harder to make because you have to get 10 people to agree instead of just one. And that is the problem that is faced by decentralized networks. So let's actually look at a miner real quick. Here are the components of the miner. You can see a better layout here. That's what it looks like intact. So miners, what mining is, it's essentially a race. So the Bitcoin protocol puts out an equation, and miners race to solve that equation. The winner gets the right to form the next block, to pick which transactions get processed. Now, why would they do this? What incentive do they have? Well, let's say you solve this problem, put together a valid block that is added to the blockchain, you get a monetary reward. So that's what keeps the network going. Interesting note about this machine, mining generates a lot of heat. This is a pretty big fan for such a small unit, but this is one of the problems that mining creates. It's very energy intensive. Another thing is mining isn't really exclusive. It's kind of more egalitarian. Anybody can buy a unit like this. It's not too expensive. Become a miner on the Bitcoin network and compete in order to solve those equations, put together blocks, and receive Bitcoin as a reward. So let's use an example of how the network comes to a decision in order to examine that. So here's our decentralized network. Here's Charlie. Charlie basically is sending a transaction. Let's say he's sending money to his grandma. Charlie is just waiting for that transaction to be mined. At this stage, it's between the miner Alice and Bob. For sake of example, let's say one of those two miners are going to win. They each have Charlie's transaction as part of their block. So who wins? Who determines who gets to put Charlie's transaction in a block? Well, the miner that wins the race. The miner that wins the race ultimately and has Charlie's transaction is going to add that to the chain. For example, let's look at a block. Let's use these blocks, in order to illustrate this example. For example, let's say we're down to two miners. We're down to Alice, miner 1, and Bob. They each have Charlie's transaction in the block that they are compiling. Which one gets added to the chain? Simple. The miner that wins the race gets the right to put their chain onto the block. So if Alice wins, looks like that. Alice's block is added to the chain, and Alice receives a cryptocurrency reward. And then Charlie's transaction is processed. Another miner, Bob, miner 2, might additionally also have Charlie's transaction in the block he's trying to produce. So if Bob wins, Charlie's transaction still gets added to the chain. Now, let's say that Alice has Charlie's transaction, Bob doesn't. If Alice wins, Charlie's transaction gets added to the chain. If Bob wins, Charlie's transaction is not in the batch that gets added to the chain. Now, what happens to Charlie's transaction if there's a block that is added that does not include that transaction? Is it negated? No, it's not. What happens is these transactions that were being attempted to be mined by another miner who didn't win, go back to the mempool and wait for miners to pick them again. So once the miner wins the race and compiles a valid block, the block joins the end of the chain permanently. So the construction of a blockchain is what makes it unique. So what exactly are confirmations? Confirmations are just blocks stacked on top of each other. And what that does, it solidifies the position of other blocks in the chain. A blockchain can't be amended, it can't be appended. What you have to do in order to do so, basically in order to get to this block, you would have to rewind the blockchain. Take apart these blocks, then change your transaction, then try to build off of that. It's extremely impractical, probably impossible. So the more confirmations that are passed, the more blocks stacked on top of your block, the higher the chance that that temporary fork situation isn't going to happen and your block is going to become part of the main chain. So these confirmations have practical uses. If you have a bunch of confirmations, you can be confident that your transaction is going to stay part of that blockchain and not be sent back to the mempool because of a temporary fork. So let's say you're selling something. Here's a practical application. If you're selling a house, you're going to want to wait for as many confirmations as needed, which is about 6. After 6 confirmations, it is almost a mathematical certainty that your block will actually be added to the chain. So let's say you're buying a car or a house. The seller might require 6 confirmations in order for that transaction to for them to honor that transaction, just so they make sure that that block stays part of the chain and it doesn't get discarded and then they're out of their cryptocurrency. So waiting 6 confirmations basically solves this problem. The problem is you have to wait. So let's say you're selling a cup of coffee. It's $2.50. It's not practical to wait 6 confirmations, which would last up to an hour, in order to buy that cup of coffee. You might only rely on 1 confirmation in order to feel confident enough to sell that coffee. So why wait for confirmations if the block has already been added to the chain? Again, there's that slight possibility of the blockchain temporarily forking and then trying to add 2 blocks at once. Eventually, during the next few blocks, one chain will be built upon and the other will be discarded back to the mempool. This is a rather rare occurrence, but it definitely shows it's a good idea to wait for 6 confirmations when interacting with large values. So money got excited when I pulled the miner out and said that miners compete for a reward. Let's examine the profitability, because again, there is that energy trade-off. Miners consume a lot of energy. Energy costs money. You hope to offset that by gaining more Bitcoin, more value in Bitcoin than you are expending in that energy. Most of the time, mining right now is not profitable. Additionally, you need to manage, it's just a big cost benefit. The amount that you're bringing in block rewards, cryptocurrency, has to outweigh the amount that you are spending in electricity, equipment, any other maintenance, that type of thing. So right now, it's more cost efficient to buy Bitcoin directly than the cost of the electricity needed for mining in order to try to earn it. Another really important part of the Bitcoin network is actually something that people usually do not like, and that's transaction fees. My argument, I believe that transaction fees are completely necessary on the Bitcoin network and other blockchains. Let me explain why. If there's no transaction fee, what's discouraging somebody from just going out there and randomly sending 1 million transactions on the network, grinding it to a standstill? There's no downside if there are no fees. If there are fees, well, that attack is going to cost somebody money. It's going to deter that attack. So these transaction fees really act as a spam control mechanism. So in times of higher network traffic, a higher fee will most likely be required to get your transaction mined. So the network is busy, you're probably going to pay higher of a fee than if the network is not busy. However, most of the time, these fees are still amount to under $1 often in times of normal network traffic, or even a little bit higher, and can cost as much as as little as a few cents. Another thing about fees, it's really important to note that fees aren't calculated by the amount of value being transacted, but the amount of resources it takes to process that data. So a simple transaction for $10 and a simple transaction for $1,000 really will render the same fee for the sender, just because the amount of data being processed is relatively the same, despite the values. So where do fees end up? Remember we just went over miners compiling transactions into a block, and miners get to pick which transactions are included. Well, what transactions do miners pick? The ones with the highest fees, because miners get to keep those fees on top of that block reward. So it's only logical they're going to pick the transactions with the highest fees to include in their block, so they get the block reward and those fees. It's almost like, I don't know how many people have been to an amusement park, but there is something called a fast pass, which basically lets you jump the line if you're willing to pay more. This situation kind of applies because let's say you attach a big fee to your transaction because you really want to go through. It's likely that the miner is going to see that, say, hey, I want that money, and include your transaction in their block. In addition to the fast pass analogy, a better example might be an Uber surcharge. At times of high traffic where demand is outpacing supply, there's a surcharge and you're going to have to pay more. In times of high network traffic, you're going to have to pay more in the form of a fee in order to get your transaction mined in a timely manner. So now that we know a little bit about fees, we can examine a unique feedback relationship that will ultimately lead us to the answer, how is Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency introduced into the ecosystem? So at the origin of Bitcoin, the first blocks happened to be mined by Satoshi, the first few blocks. The block reward was originally 50 Bitcoin. Tokens are created every single time a block is created. So how are new Bitcoins created? Well, through the network subsidy known as block rewards that the miners get when they win that race and put forth a valid block. The amount of Bitcoin that enters the ecosystem is already laid out in the protocols. We'll get into a couple of those rules after we go through all the steps of the cycle. But why, again, are block rewards there? To reward miners, to incentivize miners to contribute to the network to form valid blocks. So the second step, after a block is created, cryptocurrency is then generated. Now, why is this separate than the first step? Shouldn't you get your money and as soon as you create a block if you're a miner? Not necessarily. Remember that situation where we had a temporary fork, where you had two blocks to get solved at the same time. You can't give out two block rewards, especially to one block that is ultimately going to be discarded and then added to the chain. So what happens is your reward gets locked for 6 confirmations in order to determine which part of the chain is built upon. If your part of the chain is built upon, you get that reward. It's released after 6 confirmations. If you are on the losing side of a temporary fork, you do not ultimately get any cryptocurrency because you can't give out 2 block rewards. So after this, and this doesn't happen to all cryptocurrency generated by miners, but like we said, mining cryptocurrency is a very energy intensive process. A lot of users at this point, they take some of their tokens, keep them, but many will sell off a portion, or all of them, to recover their electricity costs. Now what does this do? This generates more transactions, generates more transaction fees, and the cycle repeats. A couple things with the cycle that we have to note that has to do with the issuance of Bitcoin. Difficulty adjustment. So remember there's this math problem, this super complex math problem that only mining hardware can solve. The goal is that a Bitcoin block is to be found every 10 minutes. Now this doesn't work on a 10-minute timer. No, instead, the math problem that is put forth is designed to take these computers as close to 10 minutes to solve as possible. This doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes blocks take 5 minutes to find, sometimes they take 15. Now, every 2 weeks, the block production rate is examined, and if it's above 10%, or excuse me, if it's above 10 minutes, the difficulty is lowered, so it's easier to find blocks closer to that 10-minute time. Let's say the opposite situation is happening, and instead the difficulty is too easy. People are finding blocks too quick. But what happens here is the difficulty is going to increase in order to make sure that you get back to those 10-minute block times. Another protocol specification is reward halving. Like I said, Satoshi's original blocks that he mined to start the network with was 50 Bitcoin. And that has since halved twice. It halves every 4 years. 210,000 blocks, which roughly amounts to 4 years. Original reward was 50 BTC, has halved twice, was at 12.5, is now at 6.25 because we've had one more halving that just occurred this summer. What this does effectively for the economy, it controls inflation. It also prolongs the release of Bitcoin because eventually Bitcoin has a finite supply. There's going to be 21 million Bitcoin ever issued, and that's it. It has a hard cap. What reducing the block reward does is it moves the time that you're going to reach this hard cap back. It kind of prolongs the production. Once all the Bitcoin is issued, fees will sustain the network. Miners will work to collect fees instead of collecting fees and a block reward. So we've been specifically examining Bitcoin, well, because it's the first blockchain. However, the innovation that led to Bitcoin didn't just stop with Bitcoin. No, people look to improve upon or create different alternatives to Bitcoin using blockchain technology. These coins that aren't Bitcoin are known as altcoins. So altcoins are different cryptocurrencies than Bitcoin. However, some of them iterate specifically off of Bitcoin. Litecoin, for example, kind of labels itself as a companion to the Bitcoin network. What they did, they're slightly different. They increased their supply fourfold and reduced their confirmation time to 1/4. So instead of Bitcoin, where a block is ideally being created every 10 minutes, a block is ideally being created every 2.5 minutes in Litecoin. Now, Litecoin was not the only other institution or only other projects, to iterate off of kind of the creation that was Bitcoin. And some interesting things were tweaked to take cryptocurrency beyond simply having monetary purposes, to create programmable money. And that's where Ethereum comes in. So Bitcoin set out to be a peer-to-peer digital cash system. Many would argue that's what it is. It met that goal. Ethereum's stated goal is slightly different. Ethereum wants to be the decentralized world's computer. So there's some key differences compared to Bitcoin. Well, the first is block time. The block time for Ethereum, the idea is that developers can build decentralized applications off of the platform. In order to do so, you're going to need a significantly shorter block time to make sure that all of these requests go through. Another cool aspect that really can make for programmable money is something called smart contracts, which can exist on the Ethereum network and other platform-based networks. What smart contracts do, the best real-world example that I've heard is probably a vending machine. So what you do with a vending machine, you put in money and a specific set of directions, and then a corresponding action automatically happens. No human interaction. This is programmed a certain way, put money in, give it directions, get something out. That's how a smart contract works. So smart contracts are autonomous programs that live on the blockchain, Ethereum blockchain, other programmable blockchains. And what they do is they can autonomously execute certain actions based off certain programmed instructions and the amount of money being put into it. So put something out for the smart contract, you put something into the smart contract, it will basically execute a specific set of circumstances and you get an output. You're seeing smart contracts being used a lot in decentralized finance, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an attempt to take traditional financial tools or markets, apply them to decentralized technology and cryptocurrency. Cool thing that's being created is actually stablecoins. Stablecoins, the idea of stablecoins is for them to hold their value and not fluctuate at all. A lot of people are in cryptocurrency for the investment. Stablecoins, not about investing. What it is about is providing a safe haven to convert your cryptocurrency into if you're worried about the volatility. So let's say I have 1,000 Bitcoin. I'm worried that that price of Bitcoin is going to drop. What I can do is transfer that balance to stablecoins, which are usually backed either by cash or assets. Stablecoins do their job, exactly what it says, provide a stable value that I could convert to cryptocurrency later on at my choice. Additionally, loans and savings are being applied to cryptocurrency. DAI is a pretty unique stablecoin that relies on a couple other cryptocurrencies. They are also creating kind of basically a savings account that allows you to gain interest over time, as opposed to your cryptocurrency just sitting there, not making more cryptocurrency. So we already went over block time, the amount of time it takes for a miner to find and put forth a valid block. Bitcoin famously introduced the 10-minute block time, Compared to the status quo at that time, or the status quo now, transferring money from bank to bank across borders could take about 5 days. There's an institution known as the Automatic Clearinghouse. It's a 3-day turnaround. Each bank might take an extra day on their end to process the transaction. So sending money across borders could take anywhere from 3 days to a week. Sending money across borders using Bitcoin, probably going to take 10 minutes. That's a huge improvement on the existing financial system, financial transmission. We went over why blockchains aren't free to use. It's basically a spam control mechanism because there's only a certain amount of resources that the network has. The network can't handle unlimited requests. So you introduce fees to discourage frivolous and excess transactions that might clog up the network. Let's compare credit cards. We already compared cash and cryptocurrency. Let's compare credit cards and cryptocurrencies. I don't like credit cards. I think credit cards are outdated technology that have just a huge amount of problems. For example, the technology is outdated. If I am paying with my credit card, let's say I want to pay for something online, I do that. All my credit card information gets stored, and that credit card could basically be swiped for any amount that the merchant wants because they have access to pretty much all of my funds. Of course, I can dispute this charge. That's a whole process. This doesn't occur with Bitcoin. The great thing about cryptocurrency is you're not providing an opportunity for someone to take advantage of you. You're providing a certain amount of cryptocurrency as opposed to just handing your wallet over. I love to use this example for when illustrating credit cards versus cryptocurrency. When you hand over your credit card to a merchant, you're basically saying, here, take my money. You're charging me $5. I have $200 in that wallet. Take my $5 and give me back the other $195 because I trust you. Obviously, that's not ideal because you might be in a situation where somebody takes that whole $200. That's what somebody can do with your credit card. They can just swipe it for as much as they want. Cryptocurrency, you're sending a specific amount of funds. You're not going to be overcharged. You can't be double charged. This cuts down on middleman fees. Another part of credit card technology that's really very inconvenient for those who have small and medium-sized businesses that rely on consistent cash flow. Let's say, off of no fault of your own, somebody makes a purchase using a stolen credit card. You're out of that inventory, that product that you sold, because that person bought it, and you lose that value because the credit card company is going to come in, take away the funds that were used to purchase, and give it back to its rightful owner. So merchant basically is out of luck. Cryptocurrency, there's no such thing as these chargebacks. Once a transaction is done, it's final. The only way to undo the transaction would be to add an opposite transaction at the end of the blockchain. So sending your friend $13, your friend would have to send $13 back to you. Since we just addressed the downfalls of credit card security, definitely have to talk about how to avoid possible pitfalls when it comes to keeping your cryptocurrency secure. So we're going to teach you how to do that. Cryptocurrency security. Something important to notice about blockchains, it's a unique mix of transparency and privacy. For example, the details of transactions are almost always public. You have that long-running ledger complete with digital receipts. It's a lot of transparency. However, addresses are pseudo-anonymous. Addresses are a long string of text that is used to send you cryptocurrency. So these addresses are just jumbled long strings of text, and it's impossible at first glance to decipher who exactly is doing this transaction. However, with some detailed history and multiple transactions, people have been able to figure out who have been behind certain Bitcoin accounts, certain addresses. So the solution for this is if you can ultimately pinpoint someone's identity based off several transactions conducted by one address, how do you avoid this problem? Easy, use multiple addresses. One thing that Satoshi specifically laid out in his original white paper introducing Bitcoin was that the more you use an address, the less privacy you have. Reusing addresses, possibly a new one for every transaction, gets you as close to being completely anonymous as possible. The cool part about this, it sounds like hassle creating a new address each time. There's actually certain wallets known as HD wallets that will actually create multiple addresses off of the same master password or private key. One more thing about privacy and blockchains, there are specific blockchains that are very focused on privacy. Monero, for example, Zcash has privacy aspects. These projects basically are prioritizing privacy over transactability or transparency, which is their specific choice. They are designed to remain as private as possible. So a lot of the details of these transactions might not be public. So where do you store your cryptocurrency? Places called cryptocurrency wallets. What exactly are cryptocurrency wallets? In order to fully understand what they are, cryptocurrency wallets, got to address public and private keys. We've actually already addressed public keys. Another word for your public key is address, just a long jumbled string of text that you could provide to anybody to send you funds. Every public key is derived from a private key. Private key is exactly what it sounds like. It's your master password to all of your crypto. If you have your private key and are the sole person that has your private key, you are the sole controller of your cryptocurrency. However, if that falls into the wrong hands, well, that person then controls your cryptocurrency. So these two aspects make up parts of a wallet, and both are just long strings of text, long jumbled strings of text. Best analogy for public and private keys probably be a mailbox. So anybody can come in, drop a letter into your mailbox, your public key. However, you are the only person with the key to open up the back of the mailbox and get that mail because you are the only one with your private key. Like I said, private keys are long jumbled strings of text that are practically impossible to memorize. So seed phrases have been introduced, and these are just alternate representations of your private key. Instead of just one long jumbled string of text, you might have 12, 18, 24, depending on the blockchain, words to write down, and these words act as your private key. So if you lose your private key, you essentially lose control of your cryptocurrency. Same thing with the seed phrase. If it falls in the wrong hands, it's the same as somebody having your private key. They can restore your crypto on another wallet, then steal it. So you have a couple types of wallets, custodial and non-custodial wallets. Custodial basically means that somebody else is taking care of your private key for you. They're managing, they have the ability to manage your private keys, which also gives them the ability to manage your funds. However, if somebody else has your private key and something goes wrong, there might be recourse to get your funds back. Non-custodial wallets are the exact opposite. Nobody gets your private key except you. The downside of that is if you lose your private key, you're out of luck. You probably just lost your crypto. We recommend using non-custodial wallets because if you are not the sole controller of your cryptocurrency or of your private key, you do not solely control your cryptocurrency. Let's just ask Andreas Antonopoulos.
Simple rule. If you control the keys, it's your Bitcoin. If you don't control the keys, it's not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Your keys, your Bitcoin. Not your keys, not your Bitcoin.
So Andreas is a leader in the Bitcoin community, has actually written a book called Mastering Bitcoin. That's absolutely great advice. Not your keys, you don't have control of your crypto. This goes for exchanges too. Exchanges are a good place to get cryptocurrency. A lot of people purchase cryptocurrency from online sites called exchanges. problem with these exchanges is they often are managing your private key. And that has caused some problems in the past. Some exchanges have been hacked and users lose all of their funds, even though they're not the one managing their private keys. So again, if you are the sole controller of your cryptocurrency, you don't have to worry about this happening. Sole controller of your private key, you don't have to worry about this happening. If you're not, well, your crypto might be compromised eventually. So looking at the seed phrase right here, I mentioned that you could restore your cryptocurrency. And one of my favorite things about cryptocurrency compared to other payments options like cash or credit card, let's say I lose my wallet. Lose my wallet, wallet's gone. Dropped it, don't have it. I just lost everything in that wallet. Let's say I lose my cryptocurrency wallet. My phone gets wiped or computer. I didn't lose my funds as long as I have the seed phrase. I can restore my funds using the private key or seed phrase in order to, again, recover my funds simply by downloading a new wallet. Why is this? Well, technically, your cryptocurrency doesn't live in your wallet. It stays on the blockchain. Your wallet acts as a tool to reference the blockchain and manage your cryptocurrency. So really, you're just restoring your funds from previous data recorded in the blockchain's ledger. So a lot of times, or a lot of wallets, when downloading them, they'll prompt you either to create a new wallet, and which they will give you a seed phrase or your private key. If it's a non-custodial wallet, there is also another option, which is to restore your wallet. And those are the same words that were on our seed phrase. Just type that in. It's like you never lost your funds or never lost your cryptocurrency wallet. You got a new one. I mentioned that I keep my cryptocurrency on a wallet on my phone. However, this isn't the only option when it comes to cryptocurrency wallets. There's actually several types of cryptocurrency wallets that kind of have different functions and have things that they prioritize over other things. So different wallets support different tokens. Some wallets only support one token. The majority of wallets are now getting to a point where they can store multiple cryptocurrencies. So there's kind of a dichotomy that's being introduced when it comes to cryptocurrency wallets. And it's spending versus saving, or transactability versus security. Some wallets prioritize ease of use for your everyday spending. Some wallets prioritize security. You might not even be able to directly transact from that wallet, but it is the most secure way to store your cryptocurrency. So you sacrifice transactability for security. Let's get into the specific types of cryptocurrency wallets, and to do that, I'm going to look at some actual examples. Hardware wallets are physical devices. Here are a couple different ones. These are physical devices that essentially keep your private keys from ever touching the internet, and effectively makes it so your coins are taken offline. Basically, nobody can manage them because that private key never touches the internet. These are one of the most secure options for storing cryptocurrency. The hard part, though, is spending cryptocurrency from these wallets. You might have to actually transfer the funds to another wallet in order to spend it. So hardware wallets, great tools when it comes to security. Transactability, not so much, but that's not their goal. So the first type of wallet that we're going to look into are hardware wallets. And as you can see, they're physical devices. Each one's a little bit different. Some keep different tokens. Some just have different functions, different features. What they all have in common is they keep your private keys from touching the internet. So basically, your funds cannot be compromised. These aren't necessarily hardware wallets, but they are physical devices. What they do, these are seed phrase keepers. This one allows you to put certain letters in certain places. So you keep your seed phrase in there, keeps it safe, can't burn up, can't be worn off over time. This one you actually engrave your seed phrase into. Keep that in a safe place, don't lose it, you'll be able to restore your cryptocurrency. This is actually a newer innovation, first one that I've seen like this. It's a bill that essentially is loaded with credits or cryptocurrency. There's a little chip right here, and all you have to do is swipe at a point of sale. Your cryptocurrency is exchanged. You put it in your pocket, just like a dollar bill. Software wallets. That's actually what I described on my phone, and it doesn't have to be restricted to a phone. Software wallets are often downloadable via desktop, PC, on your computer. So software wallets are often free, open source software, and it's great for transactability and everyday spending. Web wallets, kind of like software wallets, except instead of downloading software, you are accessing cryptocurrency wallet via the web. There are a couple downsides to this. Security is definitely an issue. Transactability, pretty easy, but that security poses a couple problems. Let's say that people have probably heard of the term phishing. What phishing is somebody creates a clone of a web page that kind of looks like the web page they are trying to deceive you into thinking you are on. There might be a login and password field, so people think they're logging into a reputable website. Instead, somebody is just logging their data, taking it to the real website, and then accessing their account. This is called phishing again. A good way to defend against phishing, make sure you get your URLs correct. There are also specific extensions and programs that can possibly point out if they think you're on a phishing site. Those are extremely helpful as well. I always just double and triple check my URL when I'm going to a web wallet. And the best way to keep your cryptocurrency secure is paper wallet. And what this does, it effectively takes your funds offline. You have this piece of paper. It's exactly what it sounds like. It has a deposit mechanism, there's your address, and a withdrawal mechanism. There's your private key. And it is the ultimate when it comes to blockchain security and keeping your cryptocurrency secure, because there's no online mechanism for somebody to attack. We went over the mechanics of a cryptocurrency transaction, but what do we do when something goes wrong? What are some frequently encountered problems? Many transactions, or many problems with transactions, have to do with the fee attached. Let's say you have a transaction out there, you're trying to send some money to a friend, and put a really low fee onto the transaction. There really isn't much incentive for a miner to come pick out that transaction to include it into a block. It's likely to be eventually included into a block because a miner might just be trying to fill it in and take whatever they can get at the end. However, if you have an insufficient fee, your transaction might just sit in the mempool. It's not going to sit there forever. Eventually, the mempool refreshes, your cryptocurrency will be attributed back to you, but still would have to do that transaction again because it got bounced back because of an insufficient fee. Really good thing about troubleshooting when it comes to blockchain technology, all this information is public, all the transaction details are public. There are handy tools called block explorers where you could enter in an address, block number, a transaction identifier, searching by all that information in order to view all the network activity related to that information. Several different block explorers, they all reference the public data that is on a specific blockchain. If you poke around a little bit at the different block explorers and compare blockchains, there are a couple characteristics that differ from blockchain to blockchain. We already went over block time. The amount of time it takes miners to find a block. Bitcoin is 10 minutes. Ethereum is around 10 to 12 seconds. Privacy, there's different privacy aspects. Those privacy coins are going to obfuscate a lot of the data that a public blockchain, like Bitcoin, keeps public. Every community values different things. Every community that's attached to a specific blockchain or cryptocurrency, they value certain things. There's reasons why they like the project. If you value privacy, you're going to go for privacy coins. If you value openness, you might go to a public blockchain, a big public blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And they all have different algorithms that are used to solve the equations put forth for miners. We talked about crypto security, but what keeps the technology secure? What keeps blockchains from being hacked or overtaken? There are certain incentives that are built into the protocol, the blockchain's protocols, that encourage good behavior and discourage bad behavior or malicious action. For example, a great example of an incentive is the block reward. You are incentivizing miners to compete, to contribute to securing the network and creating blocks by saying, hey, if you put forth a valid block, we'll give you a cryptocurrency reward. An example of a negative incentive or something that can dissuade bad behavior is fees. So if somebody wants to spam the network because of the protocols, the way it's laid out, they're going to have to pay a significant amount in fees, which theoretically should deter them from just spamming transactions. One attack vector is what's known as a 51% attack. So it's actually possible to buy computing power or hashing power in order to gain an advantage in the mining race. One method of attack that is used against blockchains is a 51% attack. Now it's possible to buy computing power, also known as hashing power, which increases the chance that you'll be able to find the next block in order to create blocks and mine. Now, if somebody controls a majority of the hashing power, they could theoretically rewrite historic chain data just by changing it and getting the majority to agree with them, or they could push through invalid blocks. It's really important to ensure the diversity of network participants while maintaining incentive alignment. You don't want any collusion. There's things called mining pools or mining farms, which specifically are there to mine. That's their job. They are willing to put up the electricity, they have the hardware, they just mine and try to collect as much cryptocurrency as possible. There's been a couple times where these mining farms or mining pools, which are just a bunch of users pooling their mining power together, and there are some instances where one entity's hashing power has reached near 50%. Now, the response to this is very interesting. They didn't want to get to a majority of the network. They wanted to go actually the other direction. And that's because it's really important to the health of the blockchain. If one person surpasses that 51% of hashing power, well, the whole system kind of goes away. It's a lot easier just to go and have a lot of hashing power, collect block rewards. It's just more monetarily sound than possibly spending a bunch of money on hashing power that may or may not yield results. So it's just, simply put, it's easier to play by the rules, gain that way, than to try to overthrow the system. Another thing about decentralized networks that keeps them secure, kind of hit on this earlier, is these central servers are a single point of attack. So if I'm a hacker and I want to get as much information as possible, I'm going to a central server. Let's illustrate this using an example. You have neighborhood A, neighborhood B. Let's talk about neighborhood B first. We have to decide, we want to rob one of these neighborhoods. We have to decide which one. And we need to make it worth our while. We need to gather at least a majority of the wealth in one of these neighborhoods. Neighborhood B, 5 houses, but they have this one house that has a majority of the wealth or value in the neighborhood. Let's compare that with neighborhood A, where every house has an equal amount of wealth, 20%. Now, if I'm a thief, where do I go? I want to get the most amount of money for the least effort. I go for neighborhood B, which is like a centralized server. Right there, this big house, that's my target, just like a server is. Because a server has a bunch of information, house has a bunch of big wealth. Over here, it's distributed. You would have to get 3 of these houses to reach a majority. So it takes a lot more effort to attack a decentralized network than a server with a target painted on it. So what can you do with your cryptocurrency? There's actually several options. First is to spend it, and spend it specifically via the internet. There are actually several different websites that are already accepting cryptocurrency. If you're making an online purchase, traditionally you're probably using a credit card. We already talked about why credit cards are such bad technology. Remember, it's like handing over your entire wallet and then asking somebody to take a specific amount of money out. Bad idea. Crypto, again, isn't like that. You're spending a specific amount. This is really important for e-commerce because the problem is I buy something off of a certain website. My credit card information processed by a server gets copied to that server, and if somebody wants to hack it, my credit card number is out there. Cryptocurrency, you don't have that problem. Like I said, there's several companies that are currently accepting cryptocurrency. Wikipedia will accept in donations. Overstock was one of the first to accept Bitcoin for purchases. Expedia for travel. KFC had a specific promotion where you could get a bucket of chicken for Bitcoin. Microsoft, Virgin Galactic, cheapair.com. This is a cheap air checkout. Accepts 5 cryptocurrencies. And Newegg for all your computer hardware needs. So one of the great things about cryptocurrency is it doesn't care about borders. It's a great option to bring along when you're traveling because you don't have to worry about exchange rates and possibly getting gouged during that process. You bring your cryptocurrency, might be able to find somebody to accept it while you're on vacation. Might seem like a long shot, but there's actually several YouTube videos where somebody in the cryptocurrency community will go to a specific country and only bring Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency instead of cash. And they usually have significant luck in finding people to accept that cryptocurrency in exchange for other goods or services. Another thing you can do with your cryptocurrency, and this is not for the faint of heart, is trade it. Cryptocurrencies rely on markets just like traditional currencies, and a lot of those markets are now being applied to cryptocurrency. We've already seen the launch of Bitcoin futures here in Chicago. Futures are a traditional trading apparatus. We're seeing a bunch of traditional financial instruments come into the decentralized space by way of decentralized finance. And the last thing you could possibly do with your cryptocurrency is something called hodling. And no, that is not a misspelling of a word. Hodling is a term that is used to represent holding. It is a misspelling of holding. And people really just amass cryptocurrency in the hopes that it will have more utility or value later. Why is it hodling and not holding? Goes back to a very funny internet forum post, more like a rant, where somebody after a few drinks was dealing with a drop in Bitcoin price, and they basically announced that they didn't care, no matter what, they would go down with the ship. They were going to hodl their cryptocurrency, misspelled hold. It became a meme, got the meme treatment, and now a bunch of people use that term. So if you see it, no, it's not misspelled. It just is a meme that resulted from somebody misspelling hodl or hold. While the first blockchain, Bitcoin, was used for financial transmission, other blockchains have expanded beyond that, beyond a simple monetary function. Smart contracts have a chance to really revolutionize how we do business, basically by taking away trusting another person. All you have to do is trust the protocol, and that theoretically, like I said, should reduce transaction fees or the cost of doing business in general. This disruption may extend to a variety of industries. We're already seeing a lot of case studies, a lot of companies involved in supply chain, education, accounting, banking, government, nonprofit, already adopting or at least exploring blockchain technology. So let's get into these specific examples. The first is provenance or supply tracking of the supply chain or supply chain management. So supply chain is basically just a bunch of different entities working together in order to get a product from production to the shelf or to a specific person. The problem with this is it takes many different parties, a producer, a transporter, possibly a vendor, to all work together. That is why blockchain technology is so perfect. There is no one ruling party that has control over the process of the supply chain that's being tracked on a blockchain. Basically, it makes it a lot easier for untrusted different parties to work together by giving them equal privileges and only letting the individuals that are supposed to see certain information see that information. So, for example, if you're the producer of a good, you might have to oversee the whole supply chain. If you are a truck driver taking it from point A to point B, then handing it off to another truck driver, you only need to know about that your specific function. You don't have to oversee the whole process. This is actually really important and can possibly save lives, because the problem with food in the supply chain is often you might pass along a product that has to ultimately be recalled because it's dangerous. The problem with this is it's tough to pinpoint exactly where that product came from. The best you're going to do is pinpoint it to a specific lot in a warehouse somewhere. But what if you could target or pinpoint a specific shipment that has gone bad? We're actually starting to see people implement blockchain technology in order to do just that. It's also a great tool for dispute resolution because everything can be public. Everybody has access to to a cryptographic receipt that outlines every single thing that happens during the supply chain process. Another thing that the blockchain could track are certifications and credentials. I'd like to tell a story to explain why this is so important. There was a doctor practicing in Florida, and problem with this doctor was that he turned out to be only 16 and was unlicensed and still practicing medicine. Now, if only there was a certain database, a public database, where that individual's credentials could have been checked. And that's the idea of incorporating a blockchain into the certification and credentialing fields, basically saying that yes, you are licensed to perform a certain function, and then anybody can look, make sure that, hey, you're a reputable person, you're licensed, you can provide the service that you say you are going to do and do so safely. Accounting is another field that just makes a lot of sense that it is going to be impacted by blockchain technology. If you think about it, accounting is all about debits and credits, all about receipts, assurance, tracking money. Best thing about a blockchain when it comes to accounting is all the details are public. So you don't have a situation where an accountant that's controlling their company's funds, an accountant has sole control over reporting, which may result in an opportunity for fraud. Instead, you have a transparent blockchain with a public receipt, which makes it very difficult to do anything malicious because everybody can see everything that's going on. So for banking, decentralized digital uniqueness brings about two things that can impact banking. The first is that it can provide the ability to know who has what at what time, so unit of account. And this ability leads us to the next thing that decentralized digital uniqueness can provide: control of your own money. We've relied on banks to be the centralized holder of your funds, and a lot of times they can act as gatekeepers. A decentralized network made up of digitally unique participants completely undermines the status quo of centralized banks. Basically, we're in a situation where banks are currently the only institution that are able to track who is what when. It's not done in a public manner at all. Blockchain is the exact opposite. Everything is done in daylight. Everything, you know who has what when at every given time. Interestingly enough, instead of ignoring the technology, banks are actually looking to adopt it. Banks are exploring it. There are several cryptocurrencies that are being used for instant settlement of funds, trying to cut down on that 3 to 5 day money transfer period. So blockchain technology can really impact nonprofits because nonprofits really rely on transparency in order to garner confidence from their donors so they donate again. Let's use an example. Let's say I'm a nonprofit. I want to start a specific project. I could label a wallet saying, hey, you could donate your funds here. Everything in that wallet is going to this specific project. People can then view that wallet, see where the money is being spent, and have a lot more confidence that their funds are going to help people instead of possibly going to overhead or being misused. Blockchains have the unique opportunity to completely revolutionize how we control our own identity and personal data. So So we give our personal data over to organizations that aren't good at preserving our privacy. This is the exact opposite of a self-sovereign identity where you are controlling all of your information and you don't need third parties, these big banks, other institutions to control your personal data for you. The advent of blockchain technology and some of the principles that come along with it make this possible. Digital uniqueness makes a self-sovereign identity realistic. Identity theft is a horrible thing to go through. We give our personal data over to organizations that aren't really good at protecting our privacy or our personal data. And this is the exact opposite of what blockchain technology is all about. By adding blockchain technology, digital uniqueness can give users of the internet greater control over their identity and personal data on the web. Really important example of this. Let's say I'm making a purchase and somebody needs to check a certain part of my ID for a purchase. I want to buy alcohol. Somebody has to make sure that I am of age, of legal age. But I don't just have to prove that I'm of age. I have to hand over all of my ID, which has my address, organ donor status, other information that isn't needed for that transaction. All they need to do is check my age. Self-sovereign identity lets you provide only the needed information to conduct the transaction and not excess information that could ultimately be lost or exploited by outside parties. So if blockchains have all these practical uses, why aren't they everywhere yet being widely used? Well, blockchains are not perfect and there's still some hurdles that have to be overcome. So blockchain's transparent nature makes it not practical to use for some applications, considering that some data is completely out there transparently. For example, I wouldn't want my medical records on a blockchain because that information might fall into the wrong hands. While a lot of data is encrypted in the blockchain, eventually encryption gets broken, and then that happens, somebody is going to have access to all the historical data on the blockchain unencrypted. So there's some information that isn't quite suited to be put on a blockchain for privacy reasons. The real-world demand and the ability for blockchains to meet real-world demand has proven to be a kind of a tricky thing to achieve. There have been situations where networks kind of get clogged because only a certain amount of transactions can be processed at a certain amount of time. For example, Bitcoin can only process about 3 or 4 transactions a second. Anything more than that might have a backlog, which results in higher fees, slowing down the network. Ethereum doesn't process much more. It processes about 15. This is compared to Visa, large payment processor, that can process 1,600 transactions a second. So Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like it have to get to a place where they can meet the real-world demand and handle the amount of transactions that traditional payment processors currently handle. Right now, we're just not there. The network bandwidth and disk space is a finite resource. The current technology cannot support the whole world. So basically, we need to find a way for blockchains to meet real-world excess demand that will be put onto them if these are to become mainstream. Right now, there are no clear answers. However, there are several projects working on multiple strategies to address this specific problem. Just second-layer networks like the Lightning Network, Raiden, and Sharding, which basically segments the blockchain, says, hey, we're dividing blockchain up into neighborhoods. You're part of this neighborhood. However, your funds are locked into that neighborhood, can't interact with someone outside of your neighborhood. So it segments the blockchain, but it also limits it. Those are just 2 potential solutions. People are working hard on solving this problem, coming up with more. There's several unanswered questions about blockchain technology. Governance, what do you do when things go wrong? It's tough to, again, find a decision or come to a decision in a decentralized network because you have so many different participants that want different things. Incrementalism, are we too dependent on the tech? Additionally, appropriateness, is the data useful or needed forever? Now, once something's on a blockchain, it's there forever. It's on that ledger forever. Now, let's say I'm tracking a food shipment of an avocado. I don't need that avocado or the avocado's journey to be on the blockchain forever once it's already been consumed and eaten and the person doesn't get sick. There's no use for keeping that information on the blockchain. It's just kind of taking up space. Additionally, the technology is not quite user-friendly enough. Now, when I first got into the space 3 years ago, it was extremely difficult to do anything with the tools provided in the cryptocurrency space. It just wasn't it wasn't developed enough yet. The technology was at a place where it was just difficult to use. In the 3 years since then, the technology has taken leaps and bounds. However, it is still not there to the point where the average internet user could use cryptocurrency just easily. Might have to get to a place where people are using cryptocurrency without even knowing they're using cryptocurrency just because it's being transferred on the back end. Despite all these problems, there are several situations that prove that blockchains are still worth using. Especially when certain payment processors are censoring certain segments of society, certain purchases, we're being spied upon and our personal data is being abused, and the internet demands a native unit of account in the form of currency. Additionally, we're currently being armed with these technological tools that give us the ability to fight against the existing fragile internet structure, along with preserving our personal data. This plays into the idea of Web3. What is Web3? Well, it's all about bringing decentralized technology to the internet. So that's done by removing intermediaries, and that means we can transact more directly, theoretically saving us money and time. Gives creators more options on how to generate revenue, including microtransactions, just more control over your business, your finances. Decentralizing the web may lead to better capacity allocation. The introduction of digital uniqueness may give rise to control over our personal data. All of this gives power back to the average internet user and shifts it away from these large institutions that have abused our privacy in the past. So there's our course goals. Let's check out the summary to make sure that we met these goals. So this is what we went over. We went over storing cryptocurrency securely, got the hands-on cryptocurrency experience by seeing what happens under the hood of a transaction. You understand how cryptocurrency transaction works with blockchain technology, understand what cryptocurrency is and why is it different than traditional money and other payment systems, and how blockchain might impact the world. And that concludes the Crypto Curious course. Hopefully by now you are competent in all things blockchain cryptocurrency related. Now, this isn't the end of your blockchain journey. This is just the beginning, and we want to continue that journey along with you. So how can you do that? How can you stay up to date with us? Join us at weteachblockchain.org. That's our website. Sign up for our newsletter to get updated on all happenings of the Blockchain Institute. Follow us on social media. Interact with us. We love getting feedback. Love talking about cryptocurrency and the technology. So just let us know over here on these social media sites.